Hi, good evening for you guys. It's morning here. I wish I could have been in France as well. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it. I'm in the process of moving into a new house here in Hawaii. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. So I'm Sam Barden. I'm the MSE Systems Engineer, and I'm going to talk a bit about some telescope options that we are exploring. So you've already seen this from Jen's talk, the cultural statement and the link to MSE's website. So as Jen summarized nicely, she went over the conceptual design aspects of MSE, 1.5 square degrees, 4,300 fiber probes, and basically the telescope concept that's currently envisioned. So as I'll get to, there's some reasons why that gave us the opportunity to sort of question, is this what we still want? Now basically 5-6 years after the conceptual design study was finished. And so we wanted to examine a bit of that. And why do we want to consider a different MSE design? Well, we want to ensure that the telescope optical design that we do go forward with is sound and can be effectively frozen. So as we move into the preliminary and final design phases, the interfaces are well known so that we can design accordingly to them. And we also want to make sure that this telescope that we build with a lot of money is an optimum and versatile scientific facility that's worthy of both the investment and of usurping the excellent site characteristics at CFHT. So now is actually a good time for us to examine this. As many are aware, we're likely facing some possible delays in the project due to lease issues, funding, et cetera. So that buys us a bit of time. And then the second that really triggered this was an analysis of the conceptual design revealed that there actually are some optical ghosts arising from the wide field corrector that are a bit of concern. And so that prompted me to look at, is this something we have to live with, or are there other designs out there that could give us better performance? And the reason that the optical ghosting is an issue, for most facilities, the ghosts are at a low enough level that you could easily do, down to 20th magnitude or whatever. But MSE wants to be a frontier, needs to be a frontier facility, pushing down to 24th magnitude and possibly even fainter as time moves forward. So we really want to have robust performance down in the muck of the sky. And if we've got artificial contaminants from the telescope itself, that degrades the capability of what we're trying to achieve. So that's what led us to examine these other options. This is basically just a comparison of a ghosting analysis where up here, this is the current concept. And you can see all these little faint, relatively sharp ghosts arising from relatively faint sources, stars or galaxies, just peppering across the field. Yeah, you can mitigate that by careful manipulation of where you put your fibers and whatever, but it would be a fairly complex process. You would need to probably need a ray tracing engine, and you need to know the astrometric positions of all the targets in your field, not just the targets of all objects in your field, not just the targets that you're wanting to observe. So beneath it is a different prime focus design study, which didn't have quite as good of image quality, but the ghosting situation's a bit better. There's fewer of them, and these can easily be dealt with. They're from only the brighter stars, and relatively easy to handle. And then I looked at what happens if we implemented like a telescope like LSST, a 3-mirror astigmat, one that you minimize the number of glass elements in it. And this is a ghost study of that analysis, what I will call the quad mirror design. And here we basically, reduce the ghosts down to just a couple very well-defined and very faint level ghosts. So that basically told us that there are other options out there. And currently, I think we've whittled it down to of order 6 different variants. So on the left is the original prime focus concept. We now have a modified version of it where the ghosting is better, less of an issue. It turns out that the ghosts were arising because of a constraint that was imposed by the optical designer on the size of the glass elements, and that forced him to use some very dome-shaped lenses, which were ghost generators. If he relaxed that, if we assume that we can get glass of sufficient size, then that allowed him to relax the optical constraints, and that got rid of the ghosts. So this would still have the same roughly 4,300 fibers, the F2 beam, and would require the larger dome. All of these other concepts are much more compact because they use their folded systems. They have more than one mirror in the system. So there's what we call the forward cast design, where you've got a secondary, but your cast grain focuses up in the middle of the telescope. This one meets all the constraints for fabrication of the segments and the mirrors and the lenses. So this could be built. And it's a slightly slower system, so that allows more fibers to be implemented in the field of view. Down here we have what we call the rear cast design. So your primary mirror is here, and the focus is now behind the primary mirror, which is a bit more desirable than having it in front for access and servicing of the instrument package. The problem with this design is it violates at least 2 of the technical constraints imposed by the segment technology. So it's unclear if this one could be built. Over here on the right are these 3-mirror astigmats. Now, I call it a quad mirror because there's a 4th mirror that sends the light off to the side of the telescope. The one up here on the top, that one meets all the constraints for segment mirror fabrication and monolithic mirror size within the CFHT building constraints. So this one, again, is potentially buildable. And then the one down here, this is sort of the natural design that astigmat wants to achieve. This is a bit more compact, but it's violates a couple of the segment constraints. And then here on the right, this is what I'm sort of striving towards. This is what I would think would be an ideal optimum scenario, because here your focus actually could be placed at the elevation axis. So it'd be like a proper Naismith style focus, where your instrument package would be fixed and only rotating. And that opens up a whole range of versatility for the telescope if one wanted it. And this one just violates one aspect of the segment technology that we're going to be exploring to see if we can get around. So just quickly going through the prime focus, I'm going to focus mostly on the number of fibers. So that scales as the focal ratio. All of these have the same field of view. All of these deliver comparable image quality. And so it's really the number of fibers, the fiber density, given a fixed fiber spacing that really varies between them. So the concept is 4,300. If we go to the forward cast design, right now that could potentially allow about 14,000 fibers. So, a factor of 3 and a bit increase in fiber density. The rear cast design, comparable, 13,000 given the current design. But again, this one doesn't meet the segment production constraints. The QM designs, this one is fairly slow at about F4. Now, one can deal with that in the fibers with little micro lenses, and this would allow of order 30,000 fibers. And this is the one that does meet all the constraints. The downside of this is it's got a really big central hole in the pupil, so it's really less desirable. It just doesn't look quite nice, but it is buildable and performs fairly well. This what I call the standard, the natural QM design. So there, it's about an F3.5. That would be about 20,000 fibers that could be met, but unfortunately, it doesn't meet the current segment production constraints. So next week, Andy and Kevin Ho are going to go visit RIASC and talk to them about some of these constraints to see whether or not they're absolutely hard constraints or whether or not there are ways to relax them a bit to allow some of these designs to be more viable. And then this is what I call the preferable design, and it's about F4. So again, about 23,000 fibers could be positioned across the focal surface here. And like I said, this is could be placed at an elevation axis where the telescope would be fairly well balanced. And if this mirror can be rotated, you could easily switch over to the other elevation port where you might have an imager mounted or some other instrument. Because these are fixed, you could potentially in the future implement slit fed instruments. You could maybe have a Muse style IFU implemented. So it opens up a whole slew of versatility. But this one, it's the radius of curvature of the segments that doesn't quite meet the current constraint. The asphericity is fine. So if we can get a relaxation of that radius of curvature, then this concept is potentially buildable. And one advantage of this design is actually it's a spherical secondary. So the secondary actually becomes relatively easy. One other interesting advantage is this is a flat mirror, the fold mirror, at a pupil, an image of the primary. And so we're exploring whether or not there's the possible prospect of ground layer AO correction that could be done there. We're not proposing that be in the first light, but that is a possible future upgrade that the telescope could undergo. This just shows basically the fitting within the existing CFHT dome volume. So you can see why the dome here on the left, this is the prime focus option, why we have to go with a larger dome size. It's because the telescope really doesn't fit within the current space. Where on the other hand, the other, the QM and the other concepts are shorter and potentially could fit within that volume. This is important because this would allow us to be even more politically correct in terms of an upgrade of the CFHT site without changing the external view. You still need a new dome, but it wouldn't necessarily need to be a different size. The multiplex gain, that again just scales as the focal ratio, and this just shows the advantage of doing that, even if your field of view isn't changing. That these images go down to about 24th magnitude. So everything that you can see within these images is a potential target. And you can see that on the right, the prime focus option, you'd have to do a lot of pointings to cover a high percentage of the targets that are within the field of view, where with the higher density of fibers, it's starting to look more and more like an IFU approach. Efficiency-wise, so this was just a comparison with the quad mirror, just to show that if you can get these high-performance reflective coatings on your mirrors, that you really don't lose significantly from the additional mirrors. And in fact, because you're using only fused silica, because the mirrors are doing the predominant aberration correction, so you don't need different types of glass in the wide field corrector. You can get by with the fused silica. You have better performance out into the K band. Whether or not you can do the K band from a thermal perspective, hasn't been looked at, but it does potentially allow a bit of an extension in wavelength space. So as I said, that if you were able to implement a Naismith style, you'd have ease of instrument access. You would have shorter fibers, and we're talking about implementing a wavelength splitter outside of the spectrographs, and that would allow the blue channels to be located close to the telescope, so their fiber lengths would be radically shorter than what they're currently envisioned. So you would get a boost in the UV side of things. And then your, quick and simple exchange of instruments allows a lot more versatility. And then I mentioned this GLAO prospect. So I'd like to think that, we have options that could make MSE even a stronger facility for the future. We can do better background subtraction because of the higher density of fibers. It'll be easier to say, hey, let's put sky fibers where we need them, rather than arguing should that sky fiber really go to a target as opposed to sky. And then this shorter fibers for blue extension, possible K-band extension. We get the 3 to 5 times higher multiplex and the potential for other instruments. So I think this would make MSE, combined with the CFHT site, an extremely powerful and versatile scientific facility, and one that actually complements even more the next generation of large, extremely large telescopes and wide field imaging telescopes for the next century. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Is there any question in the audience? Yes, couple of questions.
You mentioned that with the increased amount of fibers, you would almost get to a higher style instrument. Does that mean that I guess that means that the control region of each fiber is smaller, and you can add less to go to your target?
Seconds, I know you may need to repeat that, or I just said that we can't hear the question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you much better now. Yeah,
okay.
I was
sorry about that.
Struggling. Sorry.
So you mentioned that having more fibers relates more to a concept of IFU because they're more packed. So does that mean that you will need to bend your fibers less to get to your target?
No, I think the patrol radius still remains the patrol radius shrinks on the sky. Because of your plate scale, yeah, it's just your plate. You're magnifying your plate scale, so the fiber still needs to tilt as far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Hi, this is Nicolas Martin. I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the increase in the cost of this particular design. Do you have a rough idea? I imagine if you have 4 times or 5 times the number of fibers, it's going to be the spectrographs that will be driving the increase in cost.
I think that's probably the dominant thing, and then the additional mirrors. I think pretty much everything else probably doesn't change. We've been bouncing around the idea that's probably a 50% increase. And we're also looking at, I didn't go into the spectrograph issues, but we're looking at, I did mention that we're talking about implementing wavelength splitting assemblies outside of the spectrographs. That allows them to be very small and compact. So you don't need these large meter-sized dichroic beam splitters in your spectrographs. And your spectrographs don't need to be these mostly air, 3-dimensional, cubic volumes. By splitting out the wavelength splitter, the spectrographs now become single channel elements. And you could envision, they become more cylindrical, and costs might come down in terms of that. We're also looking at maybe pupil slicing, which would simplify the spectrographs even a bit more, and shrink down the beam diameters and make them more affordable, so that the massive scale up maybe becomes a bit more palatable, and maybe cost static. And the packaging would be more like how Hepdex, how virus on the Haberly is done with the spectrographs basically just filling up a wall of structure. So the cost is going to be bigger, and that's a big issue.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Maybe last question with a short answer.
This is, I think, a short answer. Mike Alexanderson just wanted to verify that last slide mentioned putting Megacam on MSE.
That's a possibility, especially if it's if we can get some of the QM designs are telecentric, flat focal surface, and one could envision that maybe Megacam itself could be our conditioning imager. But that's TBD.
Okay, so thank you very much again, Sam. Let's thank Sam again.